Hey there, welcome back to the channel. Thanks for joining me. Today we're talking about a watch from the mid-90s from Fortis. This is one of my favorite Fortis watches. This is the original Fortis official cosmonaut chronograph, the OCC. Now when you think of spacefaring watches, there's likely a different chronograph that comes to mind, and for good reason. The Omega Speedmaster has its own connections with NASA and the Apollo missions, all of which you're likely very familiar with. But that's not the only watch that was officially certified by a space agency. In 1994, Fortis released the official cosmonaut chronograph. This was the first Fortis watch to be worn in space as part of the Euromir missions for the Russian Space Agency, which brought astronauts to the Mir space station, which was kind of a precursor to the ISS. This watch was officially certified by the Russian Space Agency, which was known as Roscosmos. This is a watch that began life with a Lemania 5100 chronograph movement, which used a 24-hour hand in the 12 o'clock subdial. And what was unique about this watch is that it had the minute totalizer mounted on the center hand stack and tracked the minutes around the very perimeter of the dial. I really love this approach to the timing function of the watch, and it puts front and center the most vital element of the timing aspect of the watch. It's just really cool. I'd love to see more of this kind of thing today. This watch uses a 38mm case that measures 46.5mm from lug to lug, and it's about 14mm thick. Now they did move over to the Valjoux 7750 movement prior to becoming the larger B42 watch that was introduced in 2001. In the move over to the 7750, this watch lost the 24-hour hand, and it moved to a more traditional 30-minute totalizer at the 12 o'clock subdial. Below it at 6 o'clock was the 12-hour totalizer, and at 9 o'clock we have the running seconds of this watch. Now over on the right-hand side of the dial, there's a lot going on. We see the Fortis branding. We also see this great label, official cosmonauts chronograph automatic. And between all of this are the apertures for the day and the date. Now this is a design that I just love. It's very simple and straightforward, even though there's kind of a lot going on here. Everything feels very well proportioned and easy to read and easy to use. I also like the colors at work here. Now this is a slightly older watch, so these are showing their age in interesting ways these days, but the lume is kind of a greenish hue to it, and the base of the dial is a real soft matte black, and then there are orange accents to highlight the timing elements of the watch. This is kind of the epitome of a great 90s tool watch design. Now one other interesting thing about the design of the dial, and this is something that Fortis still does to this day, are the subdials have no rings around them, and they're not sunken into the dial. There's nothing to differentiate them from any other part of the dial. It's literally just the markings that look like they're almost floating around the dial. There's something very utilitarian or sterile in nature about this, and it makes it feel more like an instrument than anything else. The case back of these watches does get the official cosmonauts chronograph label, and while that word certainly has different connotations today, and it kind of celebrates the last great era of the Russian Space Agency. Of course, they're looked at a little bit differently these days, but I gotta say I still really love the word cosmonaut. I think it's a really cool word, and I think it works really well in the context of this watch. The other thing that I really want to call out about this watch is the great case. Now, the Valjoux 7750 is a movement that we are undoubtedly all familiar with, and I think we have generally come to expect this watch to appear in very large, bulky cases. This watch proves that that doesn't always have to be the case. This is a very elegantly designed case. It wears beautifully, and it has this midsection that kind of flows organically. There's no big chunky elements here, and it doesn't feel like a watch that has a 7750 in it, except for when you shake it. It does have a little bit of that wobble that we associate with the movement. But overall, this is a style of case and an execution of a case that we don't really see too often these days, and I think that's a shame. There's another watch from around the same era that we've talked a lot about around here as well, and that is the Zenith Rainbow Flyback. That has a very similar style case to this. There's very interesting elements to it, and it's only as big as it needs to be. Any flourishes or detail are kind of kept to a minimum and within a tight footprint. Now at 38mm, this is a slightly small watch for what it is, but I think it handles it really well. This does have a 20mm lug span, and at 38mm, I think a 19mm lug span or something of that nature would maybe flow a little bit more organically into the taper of a bracelet or a strap, but it brings a more muscular presence here on a watch where it really makes sense. The 90s charm of this watch, though, is just really off the charts, and a lot of that comes down to the case. Again, you don't really see cases like this anymore. It's soft, it's uniform, and it's finished, and it's only as big as it needs to be. And at the same time, it has character. And that's kind of the story with this whole watch. It has character. I love how everything comes together, and it's really a shame that there aren't more watches like this being made today. Fortis, of course, still makes watches heavily associated with space programs around the world. They have the Stratoliner, they have the Novanaut, and they do take some design cues from this OCC. But when it comes to the case, it's an entirely different story. Now, some people will appreciate those much bolder cases that you find in the newer watches, but there's really something a lot more approachable and accessible about this case that they use here on the official Cosmonauts chronograph from the 90s. I would love to see a return to a case like this from Fortis and more of an acknowledgement of this great design. Now, there's not a ton of these things out there these days, but they do pop up from time to time, and they can be had for under $2,000. And in my opinion, this is just a really interesting watch in that price range. It's unlike anything that's out there today. The design is really special, especially in person, and it wears just beautifully. It's a really easy watch to get along with every single day. For me personally, there's some watches that I handle that I just connect with right away, and this is an example of one of those watches. I really love this thing, but I'd love to hear what you think about this watch. Are you familiar with the Fortis official Cosmonaut chronograph? I'd love to hear what you think about this watch and any experiences you might have with this watch. Now, I have more of my thoughts on this watch now live over on thedeeptrack.com. I'll leave a link to that down below. If you enjoy this content, a like and a share helps out a lot, and if you're not subscribed, now's a great time to do so. That'll do it for this one. Thanks so much for tuning in, and until next time, take care.